All right, welcome. This is going to be a quick video, just kind of a beginner's approach to the church. And you'll notice the title here where it says there really are only three kind of churches in the world. And I'm going to try to demonstrate that in this short video. But a lot of times as people look at all these churches in the world today, practicing different things, teaching different things, it can be very confusing. And people often can have the wrong reaction to it. And so, even though there's hundreds of different churches practicing different things, teaching different things, I really think as you kind of look at all of them, you can see there really are only three types, and we're going to talk about those three different types in this video. So we're going to start in Matthew chapter 16, verse 18, where it says, "And I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not overpower it." Now, this is, of course, spoken by Jesus after Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And I want you to notice in these words, Jesus makes a promise, he makes a statement that he is going to build a church. He's going to build a church. And he calls it his church. It is Christ's church. And so when you look at that, that's a very important passage because it really shows this whole idea that people have today that I can be a Christian, but I don't need a church. That's just not correct. This is not biblical. If Christ built the church, then we need to be part of that church. That church, when we have a relationship with Jesus, that means we also have a relationship and a responsibility with the church. And of course, the church is God's people. So one of the neat things is that when you turn into the New Testament to Acts chapter 2, you actually have this church that Jesus built, and you have it revealed. You have its beginning here in Acts 2. This is the start of the church. And then you see how it grows and how it spreads and how there comes to be one church, but many local churches that are of that one universal body. And so in Acts chapter 2, you actually have the church that Jesus built revealed. The New Testament shows all about it. So we're going to make a little timeline here. And when did the church start? Well, it starts, of course, in Acts chapter 2 in Jerusalem, somewhere around the year AD 30 to 33, the first century AD. Now, for illustrative purposes, I'm going to use a church building to represent the church. And I apologize for that because, as probably most people know, the church, when you see the word church in the Bible, it is not about a building, it's about people. It's about saved people. The Bible calls them saints, disciples, children of God, and 3 times in the New Testament, it actually calls them Christians. And so from Acts chapter 2, as you continue on this timeline, you will see that the growth and the development of this church and how it spreads around the known world at that time. So from that time, after the New Testament, there comes to be 3 different kinds of churches. So let's talk about the first kind. Let's take all these churches and let's bring it down to these 3. The first kind is a church that takes the biblical pattern and has either adhered to it or in some places changed it, added to, take from it, and for a number of years. And at some point, this church says, they kind of lock it in and they say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to follow these doctrines. We're going to follow these practices. We're going to follow these traditions. And they're not the traditions of what we see in the New Testament. Some of them might be, some of them are, but they also have things that they have added to or taken away from, things that the church that Jesus built, the New Testament church, never ever practiced or believed in. So this first kind of church is what we call a traditional church. It sets a certain point of time, a certain practice, and that's it. We're not going to change that. We're going to keep the church pretty much the same, and that's going to be it. So you can go back in history and find the starting place of that church. Like Protestant churches, very much traditional churches, started anywhere in the 1500s to the 1600s. But that's not the same thing as going back and looking at the church that Jesus built. So a lot of these churches you see in the world are under this kind. They're a traditional. And so they go to a certain period of time, and like what I like to say, they lock it in, and that's what they're going to believe, and that's what they're going to practice. Okay? Well, as we go down the timeline, we see a second kind of church develop. And this is a church that is not about so much tradition. They might hold to some of the tradition, and they might hold to some of what the New Testament church practiced and believed. But this is a church that believes that the body of Christ needs to continuously change to meet the needs of the people, change to meet the desires of the people. And so this second kind of church is what we would call a continually evolving church. And these tend to be your bigger mega churches where they offer all sorts of entertainment, all sorts of activities. And it's really kind of about just having God as love and just having fun is kind of the idea for a lot of these churches. So this second kind of church is a church that has changed what it believes and changed what it practices, and may even have changed almost a 180 from what they believed in some areas. And so this is what we call a continually evolving church. It's the second kind, very different from the traditional church. And so 10, 15 years, this church into the future might add more stuff or take away stuff or add new doctrines or change doctrines, because again, it's all about what they feel will bring people to church, what people want and what people need. The problem with this kind of church is that there's a lot of what they do and a lot of what they teach that is not what we find in the New Testament church, not what Jesus built as he promised. And so there's really this question of where do they find authority to add all this stuff and to change this stuff. Then there comes to be a third kind of church. And this is a church that basically looks at the traditional church and looks at the evolving church. And this is a group of people that says, well, I want to get back. And what we call this the Restoration Church. And this is a church that wants to get back not to the continually evolving church, not to the traditional church, but wants to get back to the New Testament church. And so this is a group of Christians that wants to set up a church to the best of their ability that believes the same thing the New Testament church believed. They want to worship and serve God in the same practices and in the same way the New Testament church did. And so it's a church that's really kind of skipping over all the changes and additions and subtractions of either the traditional church or the evolving church to get back to the New Testament pattern. And what we really want to do is we want to appeal to you that this is the kind of church you need to be looking for. And this is the kind of church that we are at Edgewood here. We want to be able to show people why we believe what we believe and why we teach what we teach with a book, chapter, and verse. We want to be able to show this is why we teach this, this is why we practice this, because we can show you either command or example or both that this is what they did in the New Testament. And if we can't find that, and we're telling people you need to do this or that, or that this is okay to believe, or this is okay to practice, and you can't find it in the New Testament church, then can we really know that this is pleasing to God? Do we really know churches have the authority? In fact, the Bible, the New Testament, over and over tells us that we're not to add to or take away from it. We're not to change what was delivered in the first century, the gospel. No one has the right to change any of that. So, yeah, there's a lot of churches out there, but when you look at it, these three different kinds, hopefully it makes sense as to why there's all these different churches. And again, we want to appeal to you to be looking for this third kind of church, the church that wants to get back and do exactly, to the best of their ability, what the church did and what it believed in the Bible. And so if that appeals to you, we want to invite you to the Edgewood Church of Christ here in Lakeland, Florida. There's our address. There's our website. All of these video lessons we're doing are going to be on our website. And so you can check out other videos. We have different categories of these videos. We also have our Facebook page, YouTube page, and hope you'll be part of that. So love to see you at our worship services. You can find our times there, or you could connect with us online. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you in our next video.